forget it all. For in every fairy tale, a witch must come.
Written and directed by Richard John Taylor and stars Rula Lenska. We are talking Alice in TERRORLAND. This is from the same production company that recently brought us The Winter Witch. And this is a perverse and twisted retelling of the classic Lewis Carroll story, Alice in Wonderland, of course. So the story here focuses on Alice, and she is sent to her grandmother after her parents have mysteriously died in a fire. And while she's there, she seems to develop some type of sickness, and the grandmother, played by Rula Lenska, is kind of trying to nurse her back to health, giving her tea and kind of reading her the classic story of Alice in Wonderland. And she keeps having these dreams of kind of scenes from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and they are kind of twisted and dark fantasy versions of this kind of classic kind of children's story. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So this is a surreal and psychopathic version of the Alice in Wonderland story, clearly going for kind of a kind of shock value. It's very low budget. It is very much a dialogue driven movie, and kind of is trying to twist these kind of like scenarios and these character interactions to something far darker and twisted. So let's talk about what works in this kind of scenario here. I will say there are some sequences here that do involve some of these kind of like Lewis Carroll characters that do feel, they've gone down a very dark path. For example, like we have the Walrus from the Walrus and the Carpenter, kind of reimagined as a kind of a child molester. We have the Cheshire Cat, who has kind of like these Joker kind of style scars, giving them this kind of like this smiling face, and it's kind of like some type of mental patient, things like this. So there is certainly a very kind of dark side to this kind of like what this kind of movie is kind of trying to put out there. So if you want a surreal and kind of twisted tale, then you may want to kind of check it out. And there are some, I would say, some sequences that I think visually are quite interesting. And so they do some interesting visuals here, with obviously a kind of a very low budget on this one. And I have to say, I think some of the kind of the way these, like the costume designing here, is quite effective at times. Rula Lenska obviously playing the kind of the grandmother in the kind of the sort of normal storyline, so to speak, and the Red Queen in this kind of like this dream world. She looks effective, I have to say, and there are other characters as well. When you consider the budget, again, keeping that in mind, that there are some good choices, and I think made by the kind of the costume department here. And obviously, if you're a fan of this classic story, which of course has been adapted to, big budget movie with Johnny Depp, but if you want a low budget kind of like B movie, surreal kind of psychotic take on it, then you may want to check it out. So what doesn't work, as I've kind of alluded to, this movie is very, very dialogue driven. It's the encounters that Alice has in TERRORLAND really are her just talking to another character with a kind of mask on or something. Like the rabbit is like, it's just a guy with kind of like a face mask on, and yeah, it kind of looks like it's a serial killer. So it's the deepest down the rabbit hole you can get. It's not particularly kind of like grandiose in any kind of like way, and it really just is a variety of conversations, kind of using dialogue from the from the actual kind of like the original kind of story and stuff, and changed to kind of be at this kind of more perverse version of it. But it is just like a variety of conversations, this movie. We don't really ever see Alice sort of moving and doing things, if that makes sense, to a large degree. It's very much just like, oh, we'll go into a room and there'll be someone sat there, and then you'll have this kind of back and forth, and there needed to be a little bit more visually going on rather than just like a series of conversations, which makes this kind of film feel like very much like a stage play, where you're purely relying on the kind of the dialogue and the kind of the character work. Which brings me to the next problem, and that is I think the acting is fairly weak across the board, even from Rula Lenska, who is, you know, at this point quite a veteran actress, but even her here, I didn't feel she was particularly kind of strong. But there are some characters. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, there are characters I think do better. I'm not going to point out the ones who I think really did a poor job. I think there are some sequences that where the characters seem a little bit more kind of you know, real in their role, if that makes sense. But there are characters here that really don't feel particularly kind of strong, and this kind of production company do tend to kind of reuse actors for their various kind of productions, of which we've reviewed a couple here, and some are worse than others. Let me just kind of put it like that. So we have these kind of a very dialogue heavy movie without much kind of visual to sort of style outside of some interesting kind of costuming and stuff and maybe makeup, but the actual kind of story is you know, not all that kind of visual, so to speak, with kind of like poorer performances. It's not a long movie, but it does tend to sort of drag because of this. So the kind of like the interest level may not be at a premium. Let me just kind of say. So you know, it's very much going to be like, if you're interested in kind of like theatre, I suppose, and you like going to that kind of thing, that sort of style. Some interesting kind of like ideas here. I mean, maybe it would have been better just to kind of have like the Cheshire Ripper story or something, you know, rather than trying to incorporate the kind of the multifaceted sort of story as it is. And then we have that kind of the wraparound kind of like the story of what's happening in real life as well. It's an interesting idea. I think it's quite ambitious. I think the execution suffers a lot because of the budget, which I'm assuming is really the reason why we don't have a huge amount of visual kind of style here. But there is some kind of, as I say, some acting which is on the weaker side, mixed in with some okay performances, I guess. And it ends up being a little bit of a surreal kind of like quite boring movie at times, to be honest. Although I think there may well be some people who do like this kind of like surreal sort of, you know, dark twisted fairy tale. So it's a 4 out of 10. I think there is probably an audience for this. I don't think it's a terrible movie, but it's not going to be for everyone. This is going to be for a specific kind of like crowd who like their kind of dark twisted fairy tales, but don't mind the low budget kind of B movies as well. So yeah, it's a 4 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it, or would you see it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.